Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spotlight on CS Ops. I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Lind, over on almost the East Coast. Hi, Matthew.
Hello, Jean. Great to see you.
And today we have the wonderful pleasure of talking with Ross Fulton. Ross is founded Valuize almost, I was looking at your LinkedIn here, almost 7 years ago, which is crazy. And I know you quite well because we were in the trenches together trying to figure this out. Um, and I had the pleasure of working with you for many years. And it's nice to see you again and to talk to you. But tell us maybe a little bit to get started. Give us a little bit about your background and how you got into the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Jean, Matt, thank you for having me. And yeah, Jean, as you say, we have somewhat grown up together in this crazy world of customer success. And so, yeah, my background, I've been in B2B technology my entire career. So crazily, almost coming up to 20 years now, and happened to have a number of opportunities and kind of career journeys that all culminated into being quite relevant to what B2B tech companies are looking to achieve today as recurring revenue-based businesses, really having to drive that success through creating value for customers, integrating how they cross-functionally approach the customer life cycle. Um, Going back to the early in my career, I had the opportunity to build businesses that were based on things like performance-based revenue models, where the business literally did not get paid unless value was realized by the customer, because we got paid out of the value the customer realized. And so a gain share type business model, which predated SaaS, let alone predated kind of these subscription and consumption type recurring revenue models, but really was very sort of foundational and ultimately preemptive as to what we're all trying to do here today as B2B companies in the recurring revenue economy. That combined with working for a couple of companies who we evolved from that perpetual licensing traditional business model into recurring revenue, from an on-prem dominated solution stack into a hybrid and cloud solution stack. So those transformation kind of leadership opportunities, again, being just very well timed and in hindsight, very relevant to, again, what the market is trying to do today. So that kind of culminated into, as you know, my deciding to go and try and launch a company to help B2B tech companies with how they design and operationalize their strategies around their customer life cycle, with the kind of North Star of how do we get customers to realize value from our products, and therefore how we succeed as a recurring revenue business by retaining revenue from those customers and expanding revenue from those customers. So launched Valuize to provide consulting and services around that concept and around that domain, what we kind of view as a bit of a science. And that's what, yeah, we're still doing. 6 years later, we have got a sort of software initiative that we've got going on in Valuize as well, but our core business remains consulting. And today we're very much specializing in, and have done, Jean, you're working with me on this from early on enterprise B2B tech companies. So really sort of the big players in the market, a lot of whom are very tenured in terms of company history. They're 20, 25 plus years old. So there's a lot of legacies there that they're working on evolving into this more modern approach to the customer life cycle, and certainly comes with some dynamics and some traits specifically around customer success operations that are distinct from what you might see in kind of growth stage companies. Certainly there's lots of overlap and parallels, but there are some interesting variables, shall we say, that apply in the enterprise space, which I know you both have a lot of experience in when it comes to CS ops, which we live and breathe as the Valuize team.
Ross, I'm curious, and you just hit it, which is you tend to deal with a lot of enterprise companies that have been around a while, whereas maybe a lot of our other guests have been at smaller companies or they grew up in the SaaS universe. So what do you see? What do your consultants, what do your folks see when you step into an established company that maybe is making that jump over to cloud, is making that jump into SaaS. It seems a little bit jarring that you have a long-term company that's coming to you on sort of a newer problem in relative sense. So like, what are you seeing when you're talking to those enterprise class clients of yours?
Yeah, I think we're seeing transformation or evolution needs and desires that are distinct, related but distinct when it comes to evolving their technology offering, thinking about moving from on-prem to cloud, whether that be 100% to cloud or typically these days more to a hybrid model. That being one type of transformation, which is related but distinct from the transformation of evolving the business model from perpetual licensing to some form of subscription licensing. The transition to cloud, there is a very significant set of strategy and operational elements that relate to the customer lifecycle to drive that migration of the customer base onto the cloud version of their products. And that cloud migration strategy is a really great sort of use case and sort of hunting ground to develop things like digital CS motions around driving that digital engagement of the customer base to get them on the why and the what, and then enable them on the how to migrate to cloud. But it's really that transition from perpetual to recurring revenue to subscription, the business model transformation. That's the big one. That's the real heavy lift, because we're talking about the unit economics of the business, which translate then down to things like how folk are incentivized and how we're calculating the value of customers, how we're realizing that economic value of the customers, therefore where we need to think about cost attribution and cost investment across the customer life cycle. And it points to things like, which I know are both are close to both your hearts, the concept of it isn't anymore about just the acquisition of the customer. It's about that really is it's a critical event. We don't get to pass go without acquiring the customer, but it really is then about the adoption, retention, and expansion. What's critical about the acquisition phase is how we acquire the customer and what customer we're acquiring, because that has huge impact on our ability to then drive adoption, retention, and expansion. But that shift away from acquisition and then a bit of support and maintenance, maybe a bit of services, through to acquisition to enable sustained adoption as defined by a customer realizing value, which then drives the cycle of retention and expansion, is a huge mind shift. And so what we see is a lot of work being done or needing to be done around the foundational charter around, okay, what does our customer lifecycle mean? What does our customer lifecycle model look like? That translates into then the associated charters for all the different functions that make up the enterprise organizational ecosystem that span that customer lifecycle: sales, pre-sales, like sales engineering, CS, PS, support, partners, etc. Moving beyond that charter concept, then you get into like the strategies, the cross-functional workflows and engagement models. You then start to get into the intelligence layer and around customer data and customer insights. Then you get into the actual operationalizing that strategy off the back of those insights in terms of systems of action like CSPs and other technologies. And then you get to organizational design around why do we have this AE role, this CSM role, this renewal rep role, all kind of doing the same stuff within the customer lifecycle on the same customer segments? It's a lot of redundancy there, and we don't actually have enough specialist roles with enough specialist capabilities to do what are really the important activities that enable our customers to actually adopt our products in a way that they realize value. So there's a lot of that redundancy being stripped out of companies right now. There's a lot of tension between the motion of traditional services and CS right now, in terms of who is actually driving adoption, but who is actually costing the company money versus generating revenue. And it's a very interesting equation to reconcile. So you see this monetized CS concept coming up. So all very interesting areas if you're a geek in this area like I am, but all of which cascade down to the world of CS operations and the work that those teams are doing or being asked to do, trying to reconcile this kind of enterprise cross-functional landscape around this new business model.
The I love the if you're a geek in this space, there's lots to talk about because I feel like we're probably three geeks around this call, so it's super fun. The I'm curious, like you guys have worked with hundreds of clients, and I think I worked with 60 or something with you. Um, I kind of maybe am maybe leading the witness here a little bit, but I assume like what you just described, like outside of the challenges with shifting from maybe a perpetual license to a subscription base, like outside of that challenge, like shifting from the old world to the new world, I assume that the new world looks very similar for all size companies, right? It may be different in terms of scope or in terms of resourcing and how big of a system do you want to put in place or how big are your processes, but I assume like the North Star, the things that you just described in terms of driving value and making sure that customers are retained and expanding. I assume that doesn't matter whether you're a small startup today or whether you're the largest enterprise that you guys have worked with. Like, is it the same?
It's a great question, and I would say it very, very recently, it has become the same. It has become universal. It wasn't certainly pre-2022. The culture and the drivers coming from primarily fundamentally the investment community into startups and growth stage companies was grow, 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 grow at all costs, aka acquire customers at all cost. But the sort of again the drivers and the culture, the push in more the enterprise space was shifting to grow through retention and expansion. It was all about net revenue retention we got into 2020, 2021. Now, in 2022 onwards through to today, because we've had these both macroeconomic dynamics happening as well as micro in the context of B2B technology, impact the concept of profitability and the need to be profitable, the concept of kind of the rule of 40 or the rule of 50, as they call it now, and the investor mindset, whether it be private investors or public market investors, that I want to see efficiency as measured by profitability of these B2B tech companies. That I'm seeing is pervasive across the kind of segmentation of B2B tech companies, whether it be a Series A company all the way through to a public company. There's huge pressures on them to be efficient, have good profitability, gross margin. And so that therefore translates into, you've got to be able to retain revenue from your customers. You've got to be able to drive the efficient growth mechanism, which is expansion of customers. You can't afford to rely on potentially expensive net new acquisition, and you've got to drive that retention and expansion as efficiently as possible. So I would say that the mindset, the North Stars, and therefore the fundamental of the how have kind of come universalized. I don't know if that's a word, but universalized across sort of the growth stage through to the big enterprise companies. But to your point, the resourcing and honestly the complexities of doing that vary still massively between doing it in a Series A company versus a 25-year-old multi-billion-dollar, multi-thousand-person company, which is who we specialize in. But the fundamentals around defining success, measuring success for this type of approach to the customer lifecycle, and the principles of what we think of as Valuize as the competencies and disciplines that a company needs to apply to its customer lifecycle, they are, I think, pretty universal. It's just how you execute on them is different.
That makes sense.
So, Ross, do you feel like just based on that answer that a lot of the enterprise caliber who were used to living in this, we occasionally cut costs, we're aware of our costs, we're aware of our profitability, maybe we're even publicly traded and had to report it on a frequency basis, like those lessons have now caught up with that scale up growth segment, shall we say, of customers who maybe didn't have to live in that world for a while?
I mean, to some extent, I think again, going back to our geekdom, if one were to be sort of interested enough to go study the public B2B tech companies, I think a lot of people, and again, it's improved and changed a lot just in the last year, but generally people would be shocked around how many public B2B tech companies are barely profitable, if profitable at all. at the bottom line. And so it's certainly the concept of sort of running at a loss and just sort of being reliant on being able to raise capital to run the business is certainly not, never has been the domain of purely the private company. And so yeah, so I think that, but I do think there is certainly a level of discipline that you probably see more of in public companies around how they are thinking about the cost of serve, the cost of value, the cost of retain. They might not be using these metrics and these terminology, but they've kind of got that CFO-led mindset more so in those public companies than they do in the private world because of the scrutiny, as you say, the public companies get from markets and having to do quarterly earnings. But kind of conversely, we generally see, I'd say, more maturity in the slightly fresher, by which I'd say, let's say, founded in the last 10 years, whether they're public or whether they're still private companies, around understanding the unit economics of recurring revenue models and the concept of cost to retain, cost to value, etc., than we do in a lot of the public B2B tech companies who, again, were founded in the 90s, the 80s, even, I mean, the 70s. We've got clients and their adoption of an understanding of these unit economics and how those unit economics need to be addressed through the strategy they apply to their customer lifecycle. There's a lot of laggards there, and that certainly inhibits their ability to sort of accelerate their transformation around how they work around the customer lifecycle, understand the ROI on investing in things like CSOps. So yeah, I would say there's certainly no sort of company size segment that nails it and has got it all right. I think it is a different set of DNA and challenges across them. But what, to Jean, your point, has happened is that there's been a kind of a standardization around kind of what good looks like in terms of how you measure success, and then why you need to get to that level of good. But the how is still pretty, and this is a very self-serving position for a consultant company to take. But once you get past a certain size of company growth, certainly enterprise grade, which we define as typically getting into 1,000 employees and above, 100 million ARR and above, you really are looking and needing a tailored, bespoke approach to your customer lifecycle, which again is based on some very foundational competencies and disciplines. But there's just so many variables that go into how company A versus company B should approach concepts like customer onboarding, or define what their customer health scoring framework should contain, that there's no option to take off the shelf. You've got to build something that's bespoke for your organization. Whereas maybe in the growth stage world, there's a bit more sort of off the shelf value that can be realized until they then get to that level of complexity that a 1,000-person company has.
I want to dig into a little bit how, based on your guys' experience, like, is there, when you're talking about like the North Star, like everyone should be chasing this North Star, there's companies are at different maturity levels. Is there components of the framework or components of kind of the Valuize methodology that you guys feel that should be at every company, whether it's a really robust program or something you took off the shelf or whatnot? Are there kind of, gems or diamonds in the Valuize strategy that you would recommend all companies should have?
Well, of course I would say yes. But I think there are. So our framework's called Value Experience, and it is a framework of disciplines that then are broken down into competencies. A couple of things I would pull out to sort of answer that question is, so foundational to us that we named the company after it. Valuize is a play on the word value realization, and it's this concept of defining customer value. What is the value that we, as a vendor, we need a customer to, and want a customer to realize, that enables us to retain and expand them as a customer? And that value definition is so key, because when we say value definition, we're not talking about the value proposition of the company or of the overall product. We're not talking about the sort of headline use cases that you can sell against. We're talking about the very quantifiable pieces of value that map to a user's jobs to be done, that map to specific feature or features within the product. That attribution of value realization to product usage, that's what drives retention and expansion at scale, because it removes the ambiguity when you get to a renewal event or an expansion event with a customer and they're like, what value did I get from this product? We need to remove that ambiguity as much as possible. We want direct attribution between their usage of the product for the last year and measurable value. If we're stuck in terms of just talking about the value proposition and the customer's big sort of strategic goals, that attribution is often very hard to prove. The customer may well have executed on their strategic goals. Can they actually directly link that achievement down to the usage of your product or one of the 20 products that they've used in the past year in that area of the business? If they can't, then your retention and your renewal efforts are certainly at risk. So this theme, what we have a discipline around customer value definition to build and what we define as value-based outcomes. It's an outcome framework that maps and defines value down to that user job to be done, feature function, and triangulates that and builds out this framework of outcomes, I think is very foundational. We have a lot then in terms of how you then use that framework from a prescriptive motion around sales, but also post-sales to drive value and how you use that to drive success planning. So that's all kind of good stuff, but you don't get to, again, pass go, I think, as any stage of company who wants to succeed as a recurring revenue business today without having that value definition nailed down, especially because B2B technology product value is so commoditized in almost every it's happening in AI right now. Look at everyone's got generative AI, everyone's got the same summarization type capabilities, etc. So how do you differentiate in that world where you can't go out there and just talk to customers about, hey, we're going to drive efficiency through summarization capability? You've got to boil that down to a much more granular level of definition of value to be able to compete on that value basis. The other one I'll pull out is data. And so we have this discipline called customer intelligence, which is addressing both the concept of kind of what, Jean, term you and I used a lot, the customer data foundation, thinking about the customer data foundation that can give birth to things like a really good quality customer 360 view, etc. And then with that data foundation established, starting to do some important table stakes work around the actual insight side of the equation around health scoring and trigger-based automation of processes with customers, aka sort of the digital engagement of customers. It all is rooted in that customer data, and no company at any stage I've ever seen has got perfect customer data. If anything, there's probably a negative correlation. The larger you are, the worse your customer data is. But having said all that, it's something that can't be ignored, and certainly it's a call out to I think I've got someone mowing the grass up to my window right now, so I apologize if the audio is a little sketchy. But yeah, you don't get to pass go on that intelligence side of things without having that customer data foundation addressed. And the earlier you can start working on that as a company, I think the better, because it's only going to get more complicated as you acquire products or launch more products to the business, as you move into different geographies, as you expand your customer segments, etc. Your customer data landscape is going to get more and more complicated. So the more standardization you can apply to that customer data foundation through the unique identifiers, the contact management, all that good stuff, the better it's going to set you up for success further down the path. So yeah, data and value, I think, would be the two that I would pull out as the big fundamental ones. But there's, yeah, a lot in between those two concepts for sure.
Speaking of data, Ross, does Valuize conduct, or do you follow like specific research or research studies or whatever to see what's going on in the CS and the customer success landscape right now? And if so, like, who do you follow? What are you watching? I'm curious where you're picking up the trends that you know the businesses are about to take.
Yeah, I think it's candidly, is there a sort of a body of research specific to B2B technology companies and this domain of kind of how they're approaching the customer life cycle that I think is like an oracle to consult? No, I think it's actually an opportunity in the market, but there's lots of good certainly good thought leadership and research being produced um, by different players focusing in different niches. So some of the customer success technology vendors produce some good bodies of work and good bodies of research. I mean, one of the players has just released this benchmarking tool within their product, and they're actually producing benchmarks in the product that their customers can see around things like what is the average CSM to customer ratio for a product that it carries this ACV, for example, and all these other types of benchmarks. It's pretty good, pretty useful stuff. Um, the But one of the sort of leading indicators I've always used, almost like in my career, but certainly for Valuize, when we think about and define the future as one of our values as Valuize. And so thinking about what is the future for B2B technology around customer lifecycle, we look to B2C. When we look at the B2C world, i.e. consumer companies, and what are they doing around their customer lifecycle? I had some of my career in that space, specifically within like the Microsoft Analytics, advanced analytics ecosystem with companies like Crate and Barrel, and they were back then doing stuff around sentiment analysis, next best offer, all that good stuff. In 20 sort of 15, 16, 17, that companies today in 2024 aren't even close to being ready to be able to do. Same with kind of B2C companies, digital engagement with customers, giving that very sort of persona-based, curated experience from a digital perspective that drives us as a consumer to continue to adopt, get value, renew our usage of those consumer products. They are just sort of light years ahead in many, many different ways, and B2B is still catching up. So I think we're seeing that today around the application of machine learning and advanced analytics within B2B. They're kind of picking up what B2C has been doing for quite a long time. You think about sort of the in-app engagement side of things that's happening in B2B. Again, that's just been table stakes in B2C tech products for a long time. And so, yeah, you look at sort of Forrester and all those types of research companies and the work that they've done to kind of encapsulate those trends from a B2C perspective. I look a lot at those things and then work out, okay, how does that exist or could exist in B2B? Yeah, and sort of, yeah, I think that would be a bit of a kind of indirect body of research I'd recommend. Otherwise, yeah, it's shows like this. I think it's us as practitioners, geeks who are kind of trying to educate the world on some of these practices from our shared experience. I mean, we as Valuize are in a very privileged position that we've worked with some of the fastest and do work with some of the fastest growing and largest tech companies in the world. And I say, been painting with broad brushes in this conversation so far, and it's certainly not all doom and gloom in the dark ages in all of these companies. A lot of these companies are doing some incredible stuff. Qualtrics, Carrie Ardlin, that what she's doing in there with her team around digital customer success, it's pretty cool stuff. And that to me is something, as I have just done, reference and use as inspiration and commentary and insight to share with other companies or leaders I might talk to who've got interested in that area. And there's other companies out there that do the pre-sales thing really well, using outcome frameworks, really nailing that new customer transition part of the customer life cycle. They do that really well. Other companies out there are doing in-app really well. And so there's lots of companies doing parts of it really well, which I feel like are the best sources of intelligence for companies looking to learn, as opposed to kind of third-party sort of content generators. I think it's an evolving landscape in terms of that research content, and lots of opportunity out there.
Yeah, and that's good tips. I think if you're in CS ops, you're listening, like, there's a lot of resources there that you just described that I think can help like keep people thinking about what's happening elsewhere and on the cutting edge. You touched on a bunch of other like good nuggets, I think, that I want to double click on, and was around like making sure you had in the previous points, like you said about making sure you have a right customer data foundation. That's like prime time for customer success operations, usually understanding, what are all the data points that we have about our customers and how do we drive health. The other part of it you described was around value experience. And I want to double click on this as well, just a little bit, because I think, to bring it down into like kind of a more CS ops landscape, really what you're describing is how do we get customers to value? And then, what is that value? Like, how do we measure it, and how do we make sure that we can like have it in our systems and be able to track it? But the other aspect is probably like, what's the journey to get to that value, which, is the email campaigns, the playbooks, the workflows, the processes and whatnot that go in across customer success and maybe some other customer facing teams. And so I think, part of this conversation was really like super high level, and you're kind of building out maybe the top layer of the cake at the initial part of the conversation. But as you dig into like the how, and then the playbooks, the things that we put into the CSPs, you're really just kind of painting this sort of world or this cake of like, you've got foundational elements that will kind of get you to that North Star. And so I wanted to double click on that because I want to make sure that the point is clear with, if a CS ops person is working in the weeds all day long, you like have an understanding of how you fit into that bigger cake, because this is what we should all be sort of moving towards. Is that kind of fair to say, and how you might see the world as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we should use a cake, but we use pyramids as like a pyramid visual. I like cakes
Go with
better.
cake. Go with cake.
Um,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, no, it is a cake, and it is many layers. I mean, a really a good example of sort of how it all connects together is I think is represented in this area around digital CS, where you are likely going to see sort of digital CS strategies being designed and operationalized maybe by a CS ops team. You're highly likely going to have some sort of marketing function who's also doing some form of digital customer engagement, but for a slightly different North Star, whether that be sort of driving, let's just oversimplify and say for driving lead generation from a cross-sell perspective. They're going in and delivering certain touches and messaging to customers. The CS ops team are driving their digital engagement to drive their North Stars around maybe sort of trying to accelerate onboarding, education of customers, just adoption overall. But there's what is the steel thread that's going to connect what marketing are doing if we need both parties touching customers digitally, which is its own discussion. But if we have both parties driving digital engagement, what is the steel thread that connects them? Well, let's connect them through a universal definition of what is the value we're trying to get these customers to realize from each of these products. And so if marketing, you're hitting these customers around with touches around product B, because they already own product A, let's be talking to them about the value, the outcomes they can achieve through adoption of product B, that if that customer then buys product B, the digital CS motion is going to be hitting them with touches that complement that, because they're going to be educating the customer on how to achieve those outcomes with product B. And the reason we can enable that is that we've got this underlying framework of outcomes, which are the outcomes, the definitions of value that marketing, sales, and CS are all empowered and allowed to engage customers on, as opposed to marketing going in and promising the world with product B and CS sort of having no idea how to deliver that world to those customers. So that sort of, we see a lot of that sort of, a lot of risk and redundancy in companies around digital customer engagement, with that sort of lack of steel thread and customers getting spammed with not only a volume of messaging and touches, but conflicting messaging and touches. So having that steel thread at the bottom of the cake, or however the bottom of the pyramid, is going to help sort of resolve some of that. But it is, and I think that's the biggest opportunity for CS ops, is to sort of work out how do they democratize their role across the functional landscape in companies. Because CS is certainly CS as an overall profession and domain has been forced to work out how does it reconcile itself with these other functions, services, sales, pre-sales, etc. And so that's kind of, at least that is underway at an organizational level around thinking about the reconciliation of CSM roles and AE roles, for example. I think it's happening at a customer data level, in that we're seeing increasingly sort of centralized efforts around thinking about customer data, not just within the CS function or any other one function, but more holistically. But the overall operational landscape around what systems are we using, what processes are we running, etc., that's still very siloed. And I think CS ops has got the opportunity to be the operational function that rises and says, look, we've got to democratize this across these functions. Because candidly, RevOps is obviously very prevalent now, but in most companies, it's just a rebranding of sales ops. And they don't have that democratized outlook on life. And candidly, they don't have the skill set to understand the post-sales side of the operational equation. You can contend that CS ops might not have all the answers as it relates to the pre-sale side of the operational function, but I think someone's got to step up and take a lead, and CS ops, I think, is in a good position to do that.
Well, I'd love to go have that longer discussion someday about RevOps versus CS ops versus sales ops, and who has branded into what priorities.
Yeah, yeah. We've seen all varietals, shall we say, where we've seen there's RevOps and there's CS ops, or there's CS ops within RevOps, or there's RevOps within CS ops. But it goes back to, I think, what we were talking about earlier around what if we have a charter around what is the charter of the customer lifecycle in this company. How does that support them as a recurring revenue business? We can take that down, and we do a lot of this today as Valuize. What is the charter of the operational side of the equation? What is the charter of customer operations or customer success operations? And how does that, if we have to have other operational functions, how do those charters relate and complement each other? But ideally, let's have one charter within which customer operations is channeled. And then sure, maybe we have specialist operational functions to achieve that charter. And there is a CS operations or adoption operations function versus a sales ops function versus a marketing ops function versus a renewals ops function. But the more centralization we can drive, I think the better in our experience. But that centralization is very hard if there isn't like a fundamental understanding as to what does operations mean in a customer context. And we see that lack of clear charter in a lot of companies.
Very cool. The as we kind of wind down here and sort of wrap things up a little bit, I wanted to ask maybe one last question that we've asked a lot of people, and I think you've touched on some of it. But what do you see for the future of CS ops, or where do you see the world going in the next few years?
Yeah, I think what we saw in beginning in 22 really hit hard in 2023, which were fundamental questions asked around customer success as a kind of frontline function. How does this reconcile, exist, coexist, integrate with these other frontline functions that are focused on customers? That question is now being cascaded down to the operational side of the equation. How does this CS ops function relate, integrate, complement with these other operational functions that are also thinking about operations to do with customers? And I think, again, I guess my point earlier was just like CS ops getting ahead of that and taking the lead on trying to get that question answered. And I think part of the answer to the question is inevitably going to be centralization. It's going to be consolidation, a bit like we've seen with the frontline teams. And so whether that consolidated, centralized operational unit is called CS ops, RevOps, customer value ops, we as Valuize we're very quick to say we couldn't care less what you want to call it. When we talk to our individual clients, it's just the point is that there's a clear charter, a centralized function with this mandate around trying to operationalize strategies that create value for customers and therefore drive NRR. So I think that centralization very much is a inevitability that CS ops as a domain will be experiencing, and it's a question of whether CS ops as a domain wants to be pulled along and told what's going to happen, or define what's going to happen and make it happen in terms of that centralized model. I mean, we can't, we get shocked if I don't mention the word AI when we're talking about what's coming in the future, but I think specifically how that translates down to CS ops is going to be a lot of expectation management. I think that's going to become one of the biggest skill sets needed in the CS ops functions, because we're in the early stage of this crazy hype curve around AI and how it can be applied to the customer life cycle. And I think we've all been just in the last 2 weeks of relative to when we were recording this to conferences that have just been purely about AI on the B2B customer life cycle. And so the expectations and desires of the business leaders, the frontline leaders around AI for this, for this, for this, for this within the customer lifecycle are all going to cascade down as requirements, epics, etc. That CS ops are going to be trying to work out, or can I deliver this? How do I deliver this? So I think that is again an inevitable part of the future. Again, I think there's the opportunity for CS ops actually to kind of get ahead of it and be the educators of the frontline business around. Okay, let's talk about how we can leverage AI for the customer lifecycle. Here's what we think we should do. Here's what we think we shouldn't do because of either the readiness of solutions in the market to enable this AI use case, or probably more importantly, the readiness of our own data within our business to take advantage of those AI capabilities. Our data readiness isn't there. And take that proactive kind of leadership approach on the subject of AI to avoid just this deluge of crazy asks and requirements coming in from the business, or a deluge of products that they've purchased, or new features that are being released in the products that the company already owns that are all AI, and the business is like, hey, can you activate this? Can you turn this thing on? Can you give this to my team? I'm sure we're all living this right now. And you're like, why, let alone how, and let alone do we have the data ready to be able to use that? I think that's a huge, a huge, I don't want to use the word challenge because I think it's a huge opportunity as well, but it's a huge dynamic hitting and only just beginning for CS ops, which, again, to your point about research and thought leadership, etc., I think, there's something we're taking very seriously and something that I think is much needed to guide CS ops team through this. Because I think if CS ops thought the whole digital CS fervor that happened in like 2022, 2023 was a lot, you haven't seen anything yet as it relates to this AI piece. And I feel like digital CS happened to CS ops, whereas CS ops could actually sort of drive AI as a strategy within the customer lifecycle for companies if it can get ahead of the curve.
I'm hearing you say there's a chance for CS ops, not even a chance. The door is swinging wide open for CS ops to charge through here and just take the leadership spot, or at least take the reins on some thoughts and some processes, and just lead the way instead of maybe being at the end of that whip and getting kind of cracked around.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of how CS ops kind of emancipates itself from, again, what the legacies of CS as a frontline function have suffered around sort of how does it fit into the organization? Do we really need it, et cetera, et cetera. There's still, a real mixed bag, I think, of perceptions and interpretations within companies around still just fundamentally what is customer success, not just in the operational context, but just fundamentally. And so the operational function that has got the words customer success above its door, it's not necessarily an advantage. And so how you it goes back to charter, how you brand, position the mission, vision, purpose of CS ops, and potentially do change the language to say, no, we're customer operations, or we're NRR operations, or something that's more democratizing and empowering, I think is something I would seriously ask myself as a CS ops leader, and go run a campaign and work out how you sort of rise above kind of the legacies of the CS function versus all these other frontline functions. Don't get dragged into that from an operational perspective.
I'm registering the early vote for value operations, and that would be so close to Valuize that I think you could probably, license it, trademark it, or something like that.
Maybe we should do that.
And the value cake. Don't forget the value cake.
The value cake. That's right. We'll go all
wedding cake.
No. Ross, it's been amazing to talk to you, to get insights from you, to sort of have this geeky, visionary conversation. So thanks for taking this time. Thanks for joining us and our audience. And we can't wait till next time.
No, thanks, Matt. Thanks, John. Always a pleasure to chat. Love the show. Love what you're doing here. Again, talk about taking the lead in the industry. I think a lot of people get a lot of value from both of you and your insights in this show. So long may it continue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ross.